Dr. Christian, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's a privilege to have a chance to connect and also to have this chat together. For those of you that are joining us on the recording today, my name is Sandra Corrado, and my guest is Dr. Christian Perez. Dr. Christian Perez is a wellness colleague of mine and also personal friend. He is a doctor of natural medicine and manual medicine, and today our conversation will be about techniques that can assist us with dealing with life-altering circumstances anytime we're feeling stressed, helping us be more effective in our life, because we're always dealing with stressful situations, or perhaps perceived stressful situations. So Dr. Christian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could start off a little bit about telling us a little bit about your background. How did you get into doing the work that you're doing today?
Well, I am a doctor of natural medicine. I grew up pretty much in a family that practiced natural medicine. And after some much thinking, I decided to go to Japan and study in Japan for 6 years. And I came back to Canada, did some further studies in Canada, and then decided to open up a clinic that basically specializes in idiopathic conditions, conditions that don't respond to Western medicine effectively. So I had a clinic in Toronto, and then I decided to move out west. And I'm currently living in Camrose, Alberta, which is a perfect balance for me in terms of the lifestyle that I want and the services that are consistent with the lifestyle that I live.
Mm-hmm. And Camrose is a beautiful place. I lived there as well, and what a gorgeous place. I'm now back in Richmond Hill, Ontario. However, I think of my mountains every single day.
Yeah, exactly.
So
they're still there.
Oh, good. Good. Well,
there.
they're here all the time. And I will be back to visit for sure. So in your practice, I'm sure you see people that are so stressed or dealing with circumstances that are, their life has been changed so drastically and they're having a challenge managing. So how do you help them, or what would you recommend for them to master whatever is going on in their life?
From the Eastern medicine perspective, we work with resilience, basically. And resilience is taken into account when we recognize that all stress is internal stress. Of course, we have outside external stresses, these type of things like weather, temperature changes, and nature and stuff like that. But the internal stress that affects us is created by two minds, actually. Our mental stress and then our gut stress, because it's believed that the majority of the conditions that become chronic have their root, believe it or not, in the digestive process, right? And what I mean by digestion is not just only food and diet, but it's also being able to digest our everyday moment-to-moment experiences, right? And when you hear somebody say, I should have listened to my gut feeling, I should have done this, and I should have done that, my gut was telling me this, in all likelihood, 99% of the time, your gut is always right, whereas your mind can get in its own way, right? And the gut hasn't developed to the point of self-doubt, whereas the mind has. So this is how it's approached. The techniques that are widely used in Eastern medicine, specifically in my discipline, of course, are all mind, body, spirit techniques. And from a medical perspective, you address all these tiers, right? The mind, the body, and the spirit. And what I mean spirit is not necessarily from a religious standpoint, but spirit from an inquisitive standpoint, right? The inquiry brings you in alignment with what your body is trying to tell you. The interpretation of that then shows up in your consciousness, right? And as a result of that, then what happens is that whatever shows up in your consciousness that you're aware of from the inside out becomes your reality, right? So we don't experience the world as it is, we experience it as we are. That's why everybody's constantly having a different experience of the present moment.
Right. What are some, so this is very valuable because whatever, however we interpret our situation, that we're internalizing and then we're expressing, whether it's in stress or whether we're feeling peaceful on the inside. When we are interpreting stress in our daily life and we're not digesting our experience, what would you recommend to be maybe one or two tips on how we can master that or go through that stressful period or that circumstance so that we come out still feeling empowered and yet still honoring our feelings, because there's also an honoring of whatever it is that we're experiencing as opposed to pushing it aside to say, oh, no, I shouldn't be feeling that, or this is not true, or that emotion I don't like.
So this is what's interesting, because from the perspective, when I see it from in a clinical setting, especially in my clinic when people come in with stress-related injuries, by the way, 90 to 95% of all doctors' visits are stress-related if you go see your general practitioner, right? The root source would be stress-related, and then it starts manifesting as an actual condition, and it's usually way ahead of time. But the way men and women experience stress, the way it's interpreted is completely different, right? Whereas women, when they experience stress, they'll go more into a soothing type of outlet, right? That could be food, that could be other things. Chocolate is very common with women, right? Whereas men would, in most cases, have the fight or flight response, right? In which case they would dive into work more, right? Anger issues, right? Anger management issues, being snappy. Not across the board, but generally this is the way the nervous system reacts, right? Fight or flight or soothing, right? And everybody's different because the chemical makeup is different, right? You're releasing a lot of cortisol into the bloodstream, right? And that cortisol has a cascading effect on all your systems all at once, right? Whereas some people with prolonged cortisone dumps, to use an example, currently what we've been going through, that's a prolonged period of stress that we've been under. And although it may not be acknowledged on the conscious level, subconsciously it's being internalized into our bodies. Mm-hmm. And so you do see things like insomnia. You do see things like addictions creeping up as a way of soothing, right? So one of the most common ways of dealing with these types of stresses without going into prescription drugs or anything like that, I would say would be meditation. And there are different forms of meditation, obviously, and there are techniques to build up into these forms of meditation. You can use mindfulness meditation, reflective meditation, monitoring meditation, very different techniques. But at the same time, those techniques are most useful when that person is at that stage of their life where they're able to incorporate it, mm-hmm. right? Meditation is one of them. And of course, I could say diet while you're under a lot of stress, because most people will reach out for comfort foods, that soothing effect, right? In terms of eliminating the things that would basically add more fuel to the fire. And what I mean by that are stimulants, right? Sugars, any kind of food that will make your body more acidic rather than alkaline. And one of the key factors, to be perfectly honest with you, is sleep. Our ability to have deep sleep and that restorative sleep where we can restore our whole system at nighttime, that is absolutely crucial in order to be able to become more resilient to environmental stresses, right? Mm-hmm. All stress from the Eastern medicine perspective is an inside job. Mm-hmm. Okay? And it's when we start to unpack the stories and narratives that we carry inside of us, then what we realize that it's all layered. And those layers at some point or another, through introspection, through the study of the mind and the emotions, we find out that it has its root causes. And those root causes, everybody has learned within the first 6 to 7 years of their life. Right? And so this is where it all stems from. It's not a one-time fix where you can just say, take 10 deep breaths and you'll be fine. It's a cultivation. It's a practice of cultivation. It's like you want to grow a garden and every day you weed out. You pull out the weeds that shouldn't be there, right? The thoughts, the negative thoughts, the obstacles, mental obstacles that we create as a result of having this outdated belief system that keeps us stuck in a stress response, right?
And you had mentioned prior to starting with our official recording, you had used the phrase an undoing of ourselves or something similar to that, which is what you're describing. It's examining the beliefs or the conditioning that is the underpinning of who we are, and perhaps it's unconscious until we allow it to come to a conscious level. So you're unpacking that.
Yeah, you're definitely unpacking it. It's just being able to get into a state where you are comfortable enough and trusting enough to let it go. I always like to use the analogy, it's like you using your cell phone and you get an update every now and then, and you know that if you do the update, your cell phone will run better. We're at that stage now. We've literally been forced in the past month and a half to do a major update. Anything that doesn't serve us will cause you pain and suffering. Old beliefs that no longer serve you will cause you pain and suffering. Life is always right. There isn't one moment that life is not right. It's how we react to it or respond to it that makes it right or wrong. Right?
So when someone is starting a practice of meditation, because I remember, you remember when I started, you had mentioned to me, Sandra, relax your face, because I went into this like crunching my face up and I was just total focus. And I have a good laugh when I remember that. Going inside did not feel comfortable to me. So what would be some guidelines or some tips on how to bring that level of comfort when you start mindfulness or meditation, different forms?
Well, I mean, the different forms, how I like to instruct my students or anybody who comes into my clinic, it's not so much do a swan dive into the problem. You're not diving in, but you use techniques that help you lean into it, in and out of it, in and out of it. And as you go in a little bit further, what happens is that things come up to the surface, right? Of course, it's uncomfortable, right? At the beginning, but then when you realize that you're reacting to a story, not the reality of what's happening, right? Then that's when you become empowered by naming the things, by how can I put it? When you bring something up to the surface, when something shows up to the surface, you name it, you recognize it for what it is, and it's only then that you're able to release it.
You
Right?
use the term story. So for those that are listening in, can you elaborate a bit on the story? What do you mean by the story?
The story is the outcome of the blueprint that we use to live our moment-to-moment lives, right? And that blueprint, like I said, the foundation of it was set for you by your culture, by your religion, by your family, by schooling, by media, and you name it, whatever other sources were available to you. Within the first 7 years of your life, you were nothing more than just a recorder of experiences, and you internalize this. And now what happens is, as we get older, our coping mechanisms are dictated in terms of how we respond to things, right? So what happens is that when we encounter, quote unquote, a challenge, right? The reality is that we're encountering life. The challenge comes as a result of the way we think about it.
The story.
Right? The story, the narrative, right? So if the narrative doesn't match the reality, which one do you think is right? Reality is always right. The narrative is just a story that you either agree with, and then reality seems perfect, or you disagree with, and reality seems wrong and unjustified, right? So it always comes back to our story, because at any given moment, none of us on this planet are having the same reality, right? This is how you know that we're reacting to the world as we are, not as it actually is. These stories, these negatives that we carry throughout our lives reveal themselves in the challenges, because if anything, it brings up those old programs to the surface, and then you react according to the programs, and you say, no, 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 no. It's not supposed to be like that, and you're not supposed to make me feel like that. And you shouldn't have said that, right? If you don't question that reality, right, then what happens is what you're going to experience is the challenge of it, right? Instead of challenging the reality, challenge your beliefs about it, right? And once you do, you bring that up to the surface. Meditation will give you the opportunity to release yourself from a past that no longer exists, and that's reaching into the present moment and stealing that moment away from you.
That's very deep. and so when we start to dip into the story to allow the beliefs to bubble up, then we can start to question, and then we can make a different choice.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's exactly it. That's right. You can make a difference. You always have that choice, but we lose the freedom of having that choice when we get stuck on the perception, on the narrative, right? We all want a different choice, but we've forgotten we have it as a result of holding on to an old narrative that no longer works at the present moment. How do you know that narrative is not working for you at the present moment? You're suffering.
Wow.
And when you suffer at the present moment means that your narrative is not matching the reality. You suffer, you're only subject to what you think.
That's huge. So we're trapped in our own mind, basically, because out in life we're free.
You're always free. You're always free, right? How contained you feel is determined by the stories that you feel should be a definite. And when you struggle, like I said, with any situation, it's because you're holding on to an old story that's not allowing you to adapt to what the universe is trying to teach you, right? You know, the process is to grow into the person you were meant to be, and in order to grow into be that person, sometimes you have to let go of that person that you're not anymore.
Well, and that makes sense, because we're not the same person we were in kindergarten, nor in grade 6, nor in our 20s or 30s and so on. We're constantly renewing ourselves based on circumstances and new information, new knowledge. So that makes a lot of sense.
The knowledge, I agree, the knowledge is one thing, but here's the thing that's really interesting about challenges and resilience, right? That even though you may have the knowledge, the coping mechanisms come up to the surface regardless of what age you are if you haven't dealt with them. That's the beautiful thing about change, and the beautiful thing about life is at any given moment, those latent, challenging, outdated belief systems will definitely rear their heads up whenever we're against the reality. Right? So when we're resisting it, we know you become aware. Let's put it this way. We don't know. The difference between knowing and wisdom is you can have all the knowledge, but wisdom is knowing how to use it in a way that's not only good for you, but everybody else around you. That's wisdom. Knowledge is not enough. You know, there's a lot of knowledge out there now, right? most of it, which is, well, have a look at the news, right? That's considered knowledge, or is being pawned off as knowledge, right? But there's an innate wisdom that we have, that if you listen to it, your gut will tell you the right thing. And when your gut is in alignment with who you are as the person, then what happens is that you create an environment where health and well-being is promoted, right? You're in alignment with yourself, right? And that's the source of wellness and well-being, right? That internal alignment from the inside out, not from the outside in, because in our narrative, we've been told that my life will be better when I have this much money, when I have this type of house, when I have this type of car, right? Those are all external circumstances, and we don't have complete control of the external circumstances. Those are all temporary.
Right.
Right? Right?
I know you have a lot more knowledge to share, but I so appreciated the time that you spent with me today. There is so much that we can do for ourselves simply with this brief interview that we had. I know that people that are listening and are tapping into this recording would benefit from more of your services and your offerings. So if anyone wants to reach out, either to come to Canmore to take advantage of an in-clinic session, or to tap in to some of the online programming that you have, how would they be able to reach out to you? Can you provide your phone number, email, website, spelling of your name as
well? Sure. So my clinic name is Amatsu Eastern Healing Arts, AMATSU, Eastern, EASTERN, Healing Arts. Obviously, I'm located in Canmore, Alberta, and the phone number is 403-609-3059. You can also look up all the information that you would require through the website, which is www.amatsu.ca.
Okay, and your email address, best email for you would be?
Oh, it's attached to amatsu.ca, which is info@amatsu.ca.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christian, for spending the time with me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.